Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today it's another shootout, and this one is a vinyl shootout. It's Phil Collins' fourth LP solo, but seriously. Now this one came out in 1989 toward the end of the life of vinyl. So it was only pressed in the UK and in the US, and it's not that easy to find. But I'm going to talk to you about those two versions plus the 2016 remaster. That's coming up next on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. So let me get this out of the way right at the start. If you're not a Phil Collins fan, you probably don't want to watch this video. Really don't care to get a bunch of comments about how bad Phil is or whatever your thoughts might be. I think he's a very talented artist. Sure, it was something in Genesis that changed their sound, but as a solo artist, he was great in his own right. So I find this album, but seriously, actually to be his best. And it was the last one that he did in a series of 4 that he made in the 1980s. And this album actually came out late in '89 on November the 20th, just before Thanksgiving in the US. And it did hit #1 in the UK and the US for multiple weeks. And in 1990 was the best-selling album at 2.75 million copies. Beyond the commercial success of the album itself, the first single, Another Day in Paradise, was itself a huge record in 1990 and in fact won the Grammy for Record of the Year. Now, the song was about homelessness, and it was actually titled Homeless as a working title. And Phil had picked up on this whole thought when he was in Washington, D.C., and had been near the Capitol seeing people who were homeless, and was thinking, gee, with the White House just down the street, why can't we do more about this? So that was the tenor of why he made that song. He also had some others that really had deep meaning, like Do You Remember? A lover's rejection because of a failing relationship, and something that Phil himself had experienced. And the song Something Happened on the Way to Paradise was actually an upbeat Motown kind of tune, and he had written it originally for the Four Tops. But once he was done with it, he liked it so much, he kept it for himself. All of My Life was a song that Phil wrote about his relationship with his father and kind of bemoaning the fact that they didn't spend more time together and have a better relationship. And flip of the coin then, Phil wrote Father to Son, which is actually a letter to his eldest son in song. Also assisting on the album was David Crosby as a backup vocalist on That's Just the Way It Is and Another Day in Paradise. Stephen Bishop brought his vocals to Do You Remember? Eric Clapton brought the bluesy guitar to I Wish It Would Rain on Me. And Steve Winwood was playing the organ on All of My Life. So he did have some additional help to bring this LP home. Now, the LP version of this had 10 tracks on it, but the CD had 12. Well, why is that? Well, it's all about time. How much can you fit onto a record and how much can you fit onto a CD? But actually, they did fit a lot onto the LP. 5 tracks on each side. Side A, or side 1, was 28 minutes and 32 seconds. And side B, or side 2, was 25 minutes and 49 seconds. So we had well over 54 minutes there total on the record. And the one side clocking it at over 28 minutes, that's a lot. Well, how did they do that? Well, actually, these LPs were cut with direct metal mastering, or DMM, and that provides a little different methodology, a little lighter cut, and the ability to make for a longer side with that technology, and they leverage that. So there were, in fact, 2 songs missing off of the LP that were on the CD with the original issue. Now, the two that came out in the US and the UK, of course, they were the same in the sense that they were both mastered by Masterdisc and the lacquer cut by Masterdisc. Specialty Pressing did the US press, and EMI Records did the UK pressing. So I compared those two, and they are just about as close can be in terms of their sonics. So that's kind of a great testament to the process, I guess, although there was a slight difference in the noise floor of the vinyl that I'll talk about, but they were very much the same. But then came a 2016 remaster, and Miles Showell cut that at half speed. And that album actually includes the 2 extra tracks that were not on the original LPs because these are in a 2 LP format. So the original cover is Phil in his younger days. And then the second one in these sets, when they redid them, is what he looked like at the time of this remastering in 2016. Quite interesting. But also what happened was spreading this across 2 albums, or 2 LPs, 2 discs, at 33 1/3 RPM, not 45, gave them the ability to fit all 12 songs across these discs. Now, the sequencing of the songs is the same except for the fact that when you play the album and you start to hit one of the songs that was on the CD that wasn't on the original album, all of a sudden a song is in there in sequence that you weren't used to. Now, if you're used to the CD, it would sound perfectly normal. But when I was doing my shootout and comparing them, I started on side 3, for example, and I got a song in, and then the next song between the 2 records was different between the LP that was released in 2016 on 2 discs versus the original, because that song was missing on the original. So it was kind of odd. They were out of sequence in a sense, but they remained the same relative to the CD, as I determined, but they in fact missing those songs. When I started comparing them, I had a little bit of a mismatch there that I had to reconcile. But it's all good. It's all great in the sense that they made them better in the sense that they had this ability to put them on 2 LPs, bring in the other songs, and give a little more room to the grooves on that record. And you're going to see that 2016 remaster has some real difference compared to the originals. And the originals have the way they were cut because they were longer and they had to be cut a little less hot or a little less intense. And you have to turn that one up more to hear it than you do on the remaster. So let's look at how the numbers turned out for this shootout. The nature of audio comparisons is that the results presented in this video are fully subjective. They are based on my equipment in my listening room using my hearing capability. Therefore, your results may be different. My effort here is to provide you the relative difference of audio characteristics across various pressings. The 2 first pressings that are out there, not that easy to find, frankly, out in the wild, and find a good clean copy. But what I paid for each was about $40. Now, the UK one I paid a little bit more, of course, for shipping, as opposed to getting it in the store. So I had a situation where they both ended up costing me about $40. And then I ordered the Rhino Remaster for 2016 online, and it was $35. So the newer one was actually just a tad cheaper. Now, when I look at these two, the relative dBs, or how loud the record was, now the first pressings on the DMM methodology, we had one at Specialty Pressing in the US and one in EMI Pressing in the UK. They were the same volume. There was no difference whatsoever between them, but they were kind of quiet. You had to turn it up to be able to hear it compared to some other records. And as you can see, that remaster 2016 at the half speed, that one was much louder, a full 10 dBs louder. And that's the most extreme difference I've ever seen. but it's a combination of being able to cut the current one with the methodology that wasn't DMM, the standard cutting method, having more room on each side to do it, and being able to push the envelope more, combined with the lower volume or the lower impression that was cut on the DMM because it was so long on each side. So you kind of had both extremes here, because the most I usually see is about a 5 dB swing. So this one had quietness more on the original DMMs and a louder cut with the new one. So it was a very profound difference. So I would tell you right out of the box, if you have a system that doesn't punch very hard, you probably should go for the more recent one just on that fact, because on the DMMs, you've got to push your system a little more. It sounds really good when you do it, but you got to have the guts behind it to do that. As far as the quietness of the vinyl here, the US came in at an 8, and the UK was a tad quieter at 8.5, and the Rhino was about a 9. So they, not bad, but the most recent had the least amount of noise, both in the vinyl, and of course, it wasn't worn in any way, shape, or form, being brand new. Now, when we get to the sonics or the bass, mid, and treble, again, we had a lot of consistency between these first two OGs, the US and the UK. Other than the vinyl quietness, they really were just dead matches. Very, just really, you couldn't really tell any difference between the two at all. So they were strong at a 9. And then the newer one was even a tad more crisp in the upper areas and well-defined in the other areas, like the mid-range and the bass being a little punchier. So those were all good outcomes. So we had, for bass, mid, and treble, 9s on the originals and 9.5s on the most recent 2016 reissue. And then when we get to the dynamic range and the soundstage imaging and voices, we have a bit of a difference there, in the sense that the dynamic range, when you really can push that DMM louder, you definitely have a little more going to the top. There's a little more, what I would say, a compression-ish kind of sound, or compression sound on the newer cut. So the dynamic range showed better on the originals than it did on the remaster. Same with the soundstage and imaging. Sometimes things can be a little bit so hot and active that you lose a little bit of that clarity. And when you boost that volume on those DMMs, you get a little bit more clarity in that soundstage and imaging in the product. And again, that also came across into the voices, a little bit more clear and distinction there. So at the end of the day, you really have the original DMMs at 9.17. And again, not factoring in the quietness of the vinyl, so they really matched. And then a 9.0 for the remaster. So very similar, but in some ways very different in terms of the loudness of it, and the fact that, if you do have a system that can push a little more power and bring those DMMs up more in volume, you're going to get a little bit better dynamic range and soundstage and imaging and voices on that. So it's a toss-up. The 2016 release is 2 records versus 1, but you get 2 extra songs that you didn't get on the originals. So just some things to consider. And these are very different in very profound characteristics, especially the loudness. And I think that that's just something one has to consider, looking at the kind of system they have and listening at how you like it. I mean, if you really like it jumping off hot at a lower volume, that new one is going to do you good all day long. And if you really like getting a little more precision and cranking the volume up, those OGs really have a sweet presentation to bring it home. Actually, this is one that I had hoped might be released through the Analog Productions Atlantic 75th series, as there were some Phil Collins titles, and those honestly have sold very, very well. But there are some titles yet to be announced to make 75 in total, and I'd hoped this would be one. I even mentioned it to Chad, put a bug in his ear, but this album was recorded digitally except for the bass and the drums. So that may be an element that might knock it out of contention for that. But we do here at least have a 2LP 33 RPM version that does improve the ability of this to stretch out a bit more than those original DMM cuts and add just a little more oomph to the music. And it's a great album as a whole. Getting these 2 extra songs on the 2LP set that were missing on the original LP that were on the CD is an extra bonus. So I hope you enjoyed this today. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell below, and the all option gets you notifications. A thumbs up or like is appreciated, as are your comments. So until we catch you next time, thanks for joining me today on the Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.